You walk into a space and something just doesn't sit right. No one has said anything off, no strange expressions or gestures, but beneath the smiles and small talk, you feel the pulse of something hidden. It's not body language, it's not logic. It's as if a deeper current is humming underneath the surface, speaking to you in a language no one else hears. Days later, the truth comes out. Someone was deceiving the group, and you'd already known. Not from evidence, but from that whisper within. You dream about a close friend breaking down weeks before it happens. The scenes are so detailed, it's like watching their heart break from inside their chest. You wake with a heaviness that's not your own, but just as real. When you try to bring it up, they laugh it off. Call it coincidence, maybe even a weird fluke. But you know it wasn't random. You sense things about people at work that no one else notices. That co-worker who always smiles but leaves you uneasy. Months later, it's revealed they've been hiding something serious, and you've already kept your distance, not because of facts, but because your internal compass pushed you away. You sit through office meetings and feel like you're watching a scene unfold in slow motion. Who holds the influence? Who's already mentally out the door? Which projects are circling the drain before anyone dares speak it out loud? You see it all as if it's already happened. When you try to voice what you notice, you're met with confusion or even suspicion. People don't see what you see, and they can't, because your mind doesn't work like most. If this feels familiar, there's a reason. Carl Jung wrote about a particular type of person, one whose inner world is tuned like a satellite dish to signals that aren't visible, audible, or provable, but they're real. He called these people intuitive introverts. Not dangerous to the world around them, but often dangerous to themselves. Because while others live in a single lane of reality, these people are forced to walk two roads at once. To everyone else, reality is what can be seen, touched, confirmed. For you, it's split. There's the obvious world, the one made of chairs, phones, faces, and deadlines. And then there's the second layer, the one that vibrates beneath words, underneath gestures, behind intentions. It's the world of what's coming, the realm of meanings, future echoes, unseen truths, and unconscious signals. And carrying both of these realities inside your awareness, it isn't just exhausting. It can feel like a slow psychological undoing. You begin to question what's real. Is it what others confirm, or what you feel pulling at your awareness? Doubts creep in. Maybe you're imagining things. Maybe you're too sensitive. So you learn to say less, not because you've stopped seeing, but because sharing it only pushes people further away. The visions don't leave, but you stop talking about them. You start keeping your perceptions in a vault no one else knows about. And that's where the real tension begins. You carry too much inside and have nowhere to put it. Every day, more signals come through, dreams, feelings, warnings, patterns, and they pile up, layer after layer, until it begins to feel like your mind is being stretched too thin. If you don't learn how to move through this state with awareness and grounding, it can hollow you out. This isn't about personality types in the way pop psychology tends to package them. This is about deep structures of consciousness. Jung's real work focused on the internal architecture of the psyche, especially for those whose dominant mode of perception is what he called introverted intuition. It's a mode of awareness that bypasses the five senses entirely and dives into the unknown. Most people are built to rely on sensation, what they can verify, what's in front of them. They're rooted in the solid. For the intuitive introvert, that anchoring doesn't exist in the same way. Sensation is the weakest function. Instead, the primary way of interpreting the world is through an unconscious gateway, a channel to the hidden realm. Jung wrote that this kind of mind doesn't just see facts, it sees patterns, metaphors, archetypes, the symbolic infrastructure of reality. While others navigate life through action and reaction, this type watches the narrative unfold like a myth, a parable in real time. What others see as coincidence, you register as warning. What others ignore, you interpret as meaningful. You track energies more than events, trajectories more than timelines. He called it perception through the unconscious, and he meant it literally. Your mind filters reality through an inner terrain made of dreams, instincts, and imagery. You don't just sense what's around you, you feel the ripple effects of what's about to become real. In Jung's own phrasing, the intuitive introvert doesn't engage with the external world as much as with the symbols that govern it from behind the curtain. You witness life as if reading the schematics of something still under construction. But this vision comes with a cost, because without a strong connection to the physical world, to your senses, to the concrete here and now, you drift. And it's not a gentle drift. You become unmoored. Jung warned that this detachment creates a haunting distance from others. You appear strange, even aloof. People don't understand what you're about because you're not tethered to the same signals they are. And that detachment is only the start of a deeper unraveling. Within this way of being lie three silent traps. These snares aren't obvious, but they're devastating. The first is something Jung called inflation of the ego by archetype. The second is a bleeding of the self, where you lose your inner boundary and become overwhelmed by everyone else's pain. And the third, and most dangerous, is complete possession by the unconscious. Let's break the silence around the first one, archetypal inflation. This happens when the ego begins confusing itself with the powerful psychic images that arise from the deep mind. In this state, you're no longer just seeing symbols. You start believing you are one. Maybe you see yourself as the wise outsider, the healer, the prophet. You start to feel chosen, special, tapped into something sacred, and you're not wrong about being tuned in, but the danger is in the identification. Instead of recognizing the archetype as a force flowing through you, you begin to merge with it. You become convinced you've been handed secret knowledge, divine insight, that you're different not just in perspective, but in destiny. Jung encountered patients who slipped into this state and couldn't come back. They weren't just seeing the world through a mythic lens, they were swallowed by it. When your human self gets eclipsed by archetypal energy, you lose the ability to interact with ordinary life, and that creates a rift too wide to cross. The second trap is more subtle but just as destructive. Because your sensitivity is so porous, your emotional and psychic boundaries are thin. You don't just detect what people are feeling, you absorb it. You walk into a room and feel the fear someone's hiding. You sit with a friend and take on their grief like it's your own. Over time, this becomes unbearable. You start losing the distinction between what's yours and what's theirs. You start carrying burdens that were never yours to begin with. You feel responsible for solving emotional puzzles you didn't create. This level of enmeshment makes you vulnerable to burnout, to depression, to losing your sense of who you even are. You become an empathic shell, carrying other people's sorrows until your own life fades into the background. The third trap is the full collapse of boundaries between symbolic and literal truth. By this point, you've lived so long in the world of metaphor and intuition that the physical world starts to feel less important, less real. You begin interpreting every event as a sign. Every random occurrence becomes a message. A conversation becomes prophecy, and reality becomes a hall of mirrors. You may start believing that everything revolves around you, that the universe is personally speaking through coincidences and dreams, and while synchronicity is real, there's a line, and once it's crossed, clarity collapses. Jung warned that this is the most dangerous state for an intuitive introvert. The inability to tell the difference between real-world cause and symbolic meaning leads to paranoia, magical thinking, and total detachment from the everyday. This is the turning point, a quiet fork in the road. You can let the unconscious swallow you whole, or you can begin the slow, deliberate work of integration. Not silencing your perceptions, but grounding them. Not abandoning your sensitivity, but learning to use it without being consumed by it. Jung believed that those who make it to the other side of this process carry something extraordinary. They become translators between the visible and the invisible, the conscious and the unconscious. But getting there isn't automatic. It's work, deep, disciplined, inner work. And it begins by confronting the truth. Your gift is not harmless, it's fire, and it must be handled with care, direction, and conscious protection. Those who learn to survive the labyrinth of their own inner world without becoming trapped within it don't emerge untouched. They return from it transformed, not only with insights that reshape their lives, but with the tools to elevate others who are still stumbling in the dark. But to reach that place, what Jung saw as the rare completion of inner alchemy, you must cultivate mastery over 3 very specific abilities. Without these, your gift remains a beautiful burden, a lantern too hot to hold. The first of these skills isn't glamorous, but it's the foundation of everything. It involves reclaiming your connection to the physical world. For intuitive introverts, sensation, the raw awareness of your body, your breath, the material moment, is often underdeveloped. You may forget to eat. You may dissociate from physical discomfort. You may float through entire days, barely noticing your environment. So deeply immersed are you in internal perceptions. But here's the truth. No matter how luminous your insights, if you lack a grounded anchor to the present, they will eventually destabilize you. Jung called this the task of restoring the inferior function. And for someone with introverted intuition as their dominant mode, that means developing sensation, not as a new identity, but as a counterweight. You begin this work not by thinking about it, but by doing. Go outside and walk barefoot. Cook your own meals and savor every scent. Let your hands touch wood, dirt, water, skin. Relearn the language of the body, not as a place you visit, but as your true home. This isn't an escape from the inner world. It's the soil that lets your inner world root itself. Without this soil, even the most radiant insight becomes volatile. Without this grounding, your visions expand endlessly in every direction until you lose all form, but with it, they gain structure. Your symbolic mind stops spinning in abstraction and begins creating architecture. And in that grounded space, the second skill becomes possible: expression. So many intuitive introverts hold their revelations inside like pressure in a sealed jar. They see what others don't, feel what others avoid, sense what others deny, but they say nothing. Sometimes from fear of being misunderstood. Sometimes because the language doesn't yet exist to explain what they're seeing. But when insight isn't expressed, it stagnates. When meaning isn't translated into form, it mutates into confusion. That's why the second skill is the act of embodiment. Not just experiencing something, but turning that experience into something tangible. For some, that takes the shape of art. Music that channels emotion, paintings that reveal symbolic structure, poetry that gives rhythm to the invisible. For others, it's intellectual. You build theories, write books, craft models that help others grasp what once existed only in the depths of your mind. Whatever the medium, the goal is the same. You become a vessel through which unconscious knowledge takes shape. Jung himself modeled this in his work. The very concepts that changed modern psychology, like the shadow, the anima, the collective unconscious, were born from his own internal experiences. He didn't just feel them, he gave them structure, and by doing so he created tools others could use for generations. But this kind of expression does more than help others. It liberates you. It turns overwhelming perception into manageable clarity. When you find your way of putting the formless into form, the pressure in your psyche begins to release. The flood becomes a river. It flows through you instead of drowning you. Still, even with grounding and expression, there's one more ability you must develop, and this one is the most subtle and the most powerful. It's the ability to remain open to unconscious content without becoming engulfed by it, to walk through emotional storms without absorbing their chaos, to witness pain, confusion, anger, and not make it yours. This is the discipline of psychic boundary. For someone wired to detect invisible truths, the danger is that you don't just detect, you internalize. The line between observer and participant begins to blur. You sit with a friend in crisis, and suddenly their despair becomes your despair. You spend a few hours in a crowded room, and afterward, you're exhausted, not because of what happened, but because of what you absorbed. You must learn to distinguish, not just between your thoughts and someone else's, but between genuine intuition and psychological noise, between an insight worth exploring and a projection rooted in your own pain. This requires discrimination, not the judgmental kind, but the clear-seeing kind. You begin asking, is this mine? Before you claim any feeling, vision, or revelation. You start separating what arises from within you and what simply passed through you. You also begin creating rituals of protection, not because the world is inherently harmful, but because your openness is sacred and not everything deserves access to it. You might use visualization, imagining yourself surrounded by a filter of light that allows in what serves and repels what drains. You might create post-interaction cleanses, whether that's time in nature, journaling, movement, or silence, to release what doesn't belong. Jung called this conscious permeability, the ability to choose when to open and when to close, not as a wall but as a gate you control. Without this, you either shut down your gift entirely or allow it to control you, but with it, you remain sensitive without becoming vulnerable. You remain intuitive without becoming consumed. As these three practices deepen, sensation, expression, boundary, you begin to notice a shift. What once felt chaotic begins to organize itself. What once overwhelmed you now becomes a source of quiet power. You're no longer a prisoner of your insight. You're its steward. And with that shift comes a sense of belonging, not necessarily to people at first, but to yourself. You stop asking for others to understand you because you finally understand yourself. The loneliness eases, not because the world has changed, but because you found your own rhythm. And in that stillness, others like you begin to appear. People who speak your language, people who walk between worlds and don't flinch at what you see. People who have also faced the same traps and chosen integration instead of collapse. You realize you're not here to be normal. You're not here to blend in or explain away your intensity. You're here to bridge realms, to pull wisdom from the unseen and hand it to those still lost in the dark. You're here to make invisible knowledge visible, but only if you do the work. Only if you protect your mind the way a sculptor protects their hands. If you've recognized yourself in these words, you're not imagining things. This path is rare, it's difficult, It's lonely, but it's also sacred. You were never meant to stay in the cave of perception. You were meant to bring fire back to the village, and to do that, you must know the flame without letting it burn you alive. Where are you now in this journey? Are you still entranced by the thrill of seeing what others miss? Or are you knee-deep in the flood, trying to tell which voices belong to you? Maybe you're just now glimpsing the possibility of integration, unsure if it's even possible. But it is. Not easy, not immediate, but possible. And it begins with claiming your role, not as the one who knows everything, but as the one willing to see clearly, speak honestly, and live responsibly with their gifts. You don't need to convince anyone of your sensitivity. You don't need external validation to confirm what you've always known. You just need to refine it, protect it, and offer it only where it can do good. The world doesn't need more noise, it needs translators of silence. People who see the architecture of truth and have the courage to shape it into something others can use. You're not broken for perceiving too deeply. You're not fragile for feeling so much. You are powerful when that power is channeled with care. So here's the quiet truth. Your vision is valid. Your perception is real. Your gift matters, but only if you learn to live with it instead of being ruled by it. Only if you ground it in the soil of your body, give it shape through your voice or hands, and protect it with the dignity it deserves. Because your mind was never meant to be a battlefield. It was meant to be a bridge between the seen and unseen, between the ordinary and the sacred, between the self and the collective. And now that you know this, the question is no longer whether you see too much, it's whether you're ready to see it and still stay whole. That's the journey. That's the work. And if you're walking that road now, you're not walking it alone.